Ladies and gents, please give a huge BizX welcome. They're extraordinary, they really are, to a duo who will completely reframe how you think about the word can't and performance, the Tempest Two. Come on.
What happens when you remove the word can't? We've spent the last 10 years trying to find out. So my name's James, this is Tom, and we are the Tempest Two. And we are professional adventurers. And yes, we are aware of how ridiculous that is. But we are professional adventurers in the least traditional sense, meaning that every adventure we take on, we have zero experience in. And that is by design. Because it's not really about the challenges that we're taking on, it's about how we approach it and if we can make this thing happen. So we're going to talk to you now for the next hour or so about our journey, some of the lessons we've learned along the way from, as Kirsty said, crossing oceans, climbing mountains, and everything in between. And I want you to think not necessarily about what you've done, because some of those challenges may not resonate with you and in your business, both personal and professional, but in how you overcome those challenges and how you react in certain situations.
So you guys are all business owners. Each one of you will have your founding story. Maybe you thought of the idea in the shower. Well, our founding story was 10 years ago, and it began in the pub. I was in a pub in East London called the Dickens Inn, St. Catherine's Dock. And I was there because I was at an event called the Clipper World Yacht Race, a circumnavigational yacht race around the world that civilians can enter. And the reason I was there was my mum had entered this race. She had raced on this incredible yacht from London to Rio, spent weeks at sea, amazing achievement, and this was kind of the culmination event. She was there with her team, huge emotion, amazing achievement, and about 10 meters away, I was stood at the bar on my own, and I had this epiphany. And I suddenly sat there and I thought, Christ, my mum is more of a badass than I am.
She still is.
She still is, but it's not about her. And I jumped onto Google. Literally, I had like 2.5 Guinness, so I was well on my way. I jumped onto Google, and I typed in biggest adventures in the world. You had the North Pole, South Pole, Everest, the Amazon. And on page 2 of Google, where no man has been before, was ocean rowing. And the thought process was simple. If my mum is going to sail the Atlantic, then my ego is going to make me try and row it. So I got my phone out, and I text James. And this huge life-changing decision, this huge moment that would change our lives, we had no romantic backstory in adventure. We hadn't grown up on the waves and always envisaged ourselves as explorers. This huge decision over a few drinks was signed off with a bunch of emojis. And I'm sure there's many people in this room where you maybe have one too many drinks, you wake up the next morning, you look at your phone, and you've probably sent a few text messages that you don't remember sending and you probably shouldn't have sent. This is one of those occasions. But in the morning, I opened my phone and it was flooded full of messages on my WhatsApp from friends and people that were in the room with me that night. And in my drunken state, I had gone around the room trying to steal the limelight from my own mother and told everyone that I was now going to become a legendary adventurer. So we had this obligation. We had to do it. So fast forward 18 months. James and I had 2 main obstacles to overcome. The first obstacle was that neither of us had ever rowed a boat and never been at sea. The second obstacle, I know this is a big room and we're quite far away, but the second obstacle was that we're about half the height of an average rower. So everything was stacked against us. But 18 months of training, of raising money through sponsorship, of getting ourselves prepared, we eventually got to Porto-Magan in Gran Canaria, and we rowed out this harbor. No fanfare, no fireworks, no crowd, no support boat, just us on a 6-meter rowing boat. And as we ping-ponged out this harbor, we hit 3 yachts. It took us about an hour to get out. And we pulled out of this harbor, and all we knew was we just needed to turn right, and 3,000 miles away was the Caribbean. And as we left, you know, if you can imagine, we're full of energy, full of adrenaline. As we left, this big northern guy on a pedalo came up beside us. He was at the all-inclusive. He'd had about 15 pints before breakfast. And he was like, boys, like, where are you going? We're in this boat, sponsorship logos all over it. He's like, where are you boys going? And we're there full of energy, and we're like, mate, we are on an adventure of a lifetime. We are rowing across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. And he just looked at us both and went, no chance, and then dusted us. Dusted us.
Sorry, was that a northern accent?
Yeah, that was a northern accent there, just for you guys. Luckily, we didn't perish at sea, because that would have been probably the most tragic last interaction with humankind imaginable. But this was it. This was now something we'd spoken about for 18 months. We had 3,000 miles ahead of us, and we now had to go and do what we said we were going to do.
Yeah, so this is the honeymoon period, to put it lightly. We're actually 100 meters away from the harbour wall at this point. So we're taking selfies, and we're actually still logged on to the Wi-Fi from the cafe. Just sending photos to friends and family. You know, we told you we'd do it. Here we're going. But really deep down, we were petrified. And at this point, it's a really interesting one for me, because I have zero recollection of this moment whatsoever. When we arrived into Gran Canaria, naturally, that was the first time we put our boat into the sea. So you pack it, you repack it, we branded it, we did sea trials, and it was only at that point that we realized that I suffered with seasickness really badly, which isn't ideal when you're staring down 2 months at sea and 3,000 miles. But luckily, Tom's mum was there to wave us off, say goodbye, so she was able to supply me with her seasickness tablets that she'd taken on her crossing. But we still think she must have got them confused for some other tablets in her bag, because I have no recollection whatsoever. I was tripping out for 3 days straight. So it might look like I'm there and I know what I'm doing, but behind those glasses, I'm a vacant human being. And I sort of came round about 2 days later. It was all a bit odd, wasn't it?
I haven't asked my mum what those tablets were, and I'm not sure I want to know the answer. But to give you guys some context as to our daily life, so James and I would row in a shift pattern, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. So when James is rowing for 2 hours, I'm in the cabin, I'm sleeping, I'm eating, I'm stretching, and we swap. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day, until we eventually hit the Caribbean. And we rowed out of the harbor together, and then we went into the shift pattern as the sun went down. And James kind of got into the cabin, gave me a fist bump, closed the cabin door, and this was when the enormity of this challenge really dawned on us. If you can imagine, we'd never been at sea on this boat. We'd only trained 4 times on a river in Essex. And the sky, I know, yeah, pretty moronic. The sky was just a different shade of black to the waves. We were absolutely petrified of the night. Every single day, for the first half of the row, when the sun would go down, the morale on the boat would drop with it, and we were just petrified. And then on the 12th day of being at sea, in the middle of the night, during a great shift, a really quick shift, the one thing that would keep us up at night when we were trying to get to sleep in the 18 months leading up to the row, the worst case scenario in our head became a reality.
So I had the 4 a.m. till 6 a.m. shift, which was pretty terrible at the best of times, to be honest. And in the middle of the night, there's really not a lot to do when you're rowing an ocean and it's pitch black, other than stare at the tiny little speedometer on the cabin door. So in that regard, the speedometer was looking good. The number was high. So we were making great progress to Barbados, and that's really all you can care about. But that shift in particular was a white-knuckle ride, to put it lightly. The wind was really high, the waves were massive, and then at about 5 a.m., this big rogue wave reared up on our right-hand side, and we got completely barreled. As the wave broke, the lip of the wave smashed me across the chest and knocked me straight out of the boat. I actually got knocked out of my shoes. They stayed stuck in the rowing plate, and I was forced overboard, into what felt like still the weirdest trance-like slow motion I've ever experienced. It felt like I was in a washing machine, and I still have a really vivid memory of my head torch getting ripped off my head, and there was a red flashing light on the back of it, and just seeing it sinking. And it was 5 kilometers deep at this point, and it was only really then that I had this moment. I just thought, shit. to put it lightly. But, you know, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is the worst case scenario. It's pretty early on in the voyage. There's nothing to say that this isn't going to keep happening. And this is pretty bad. You know, I was snapped out of this weird way of thinking, I guess quite realistic way of thinking, by this lifeline. so the rower would always wear a climbing harness with a length of rope to stay tethered to the boat. Otherwise, the boat carries on going west in the wind and in the waves, and I'd have just been left treading water until I couldn't do that anymore. And it's kind of that sort of sudden realization of how quickly this thing can change. But the lifeline did its job. It pulled me tight and snapped me back to some sort of reality as I made my way back along the line, just as the boat self-righted, and I saw Tommy sticking his head out the cabin door.
So during this, I'm fast asleep in the cabin when James somehow managed to crash our boat in the middle of an ocean. And I woke up on the ceiling of the cabin to what I honestly thought was the boat being snapped in half. The noise is genuinely indescribable. And I hit the ceiling, and there was this, amongst this moment of just pure, the worst case scenario, pure chaos, pure fear, was a moment of calm. And I'll tell you why. We were at sea for Christmas. On Christmas Day, we did Secret Santa, which in hindsight was pointless, being two of us. But it was a pretty boring trip, I won't lie. But for Christmas, I bought James a Justin Bieber calendar because he's a believer. And as I hit the ceiling, this worst-case scenario, this life-threatening scenario, the calendar hit the ceiling and it opened on May or June or something, and I locked eyes with Bieber. He had his top off, he was looking pretty decent, and it was this moment of just pure quiet and calm until I was snapped out of it.
I'm glad you were having a nice time.
Whilst James is fighting for his life, I am dealing with the king of pop. And I was snapped out of it when the boat luckily did its job, self-righted, and I fell back down to the bottom of the cabin. And we've got a tiny porthole that looks out of the cabin to the deck, and it's pitch black outside, middle of the night. I'm trying to discern whether we are sinking, whether we're underwater, above water, because if I open this cabin door and it floods, we're pretty much done for. So after figuring out that we're just bobbing above the water, I open the door and it's just absolute carnage. We've got just one head torch now. James is climbing back on board. I can see in the distance our spare oars have floated away, loads of our supplies. And what was so fascinating about this moment in hindsight is when we would lie awake in bed leading up to this row, thinking of this worst case scenario, we presumed, like many people would, it would just be headless chickens. Pure screaming, crying, panic, fear. But what was so fascinating, it was the complete opposite. We were forced into this really innate process-driven mode where we knew what had happened. We had a to-do list now. James was freezing cold. He might go into shock, get him sorted. We realized that our rudder was hanging off by a piece of string. So we were veering sideways. We were going to get barreled again. And we just went about making ourselves safe until 4 hours later, the sun came up, and we managed to kind of put a smile on our face. And we had this weird kind of confidence from this. If we can go through what we perceive to be the worst case scenario and come out of it relatively unscathed, then maybe there was a chance we were actually going to get to Barbados in one piece.
Yes, this is our tracker across the Atlantic, and we had land support that were based in the UK that we would speak to regularly for weather updates, for some troubleshooting. And a fun fact about our land support was they actually got 100% of the weather forecast wrong, which I think is more impressive than getting some right, some wrong. They told us about a weather system that was getting closer to us, that it was nothing to worry about, but if our friends and family who were emailing and messaging us had asked a question, all good, we were aware of it, fine. 2 days later, we spoke to land support again, nothing to worry about whatsoever, but the system was getting a bit closer, and it might suck up some of our wind and waves. So rowing is going to be tough for a couple of days. You can expect, difficulty in conditions. But then after that, you've got champagne rowing all the way to Barbados. Now, that was their words verbatim. And 2 days after that, this happened.
Let's take a look out in the tropics, and I'll show you what's going on. We've got a hurricane in the tropics during the month of January. There have only been 4 named storms since we've been keeping records during the month of January. Some of the computer models have it coming pretty close to a Category 2 hurricane.
It's a fine example of their weather forecasting coming to fruition. And this image is the same tracker that I just showed you that is now zoomed in. And every blue dot here is the GPS signal sent from our boat every 6 hours. So as you can see, it's all going relatively well until it isn't. And we had built up quite a following of people known as dot watchers. So most of these people we didn't know, but they would log on and they would watch our dot cross the Atlantic very slowly, might I add. And then we started getting emails from both friends, family, and unknowns asking us if we knew we were now going the wrong direction. And out of all of the difficulty that we faced with the hurricane, we were stuck in the cabin, which is the size of half a single bed. We'd play rock, paper, scissors to see who would risk their life to bring in some freeze-dried food every mealtime, which in hindsight, we should have played once and brought all the food in, but hindsight is 2020. But it was the messages from these people that was actually the toughest to take, but we did genuinely struggle inside the hurricane.
Yeah, so we found out from our wonderful weather reporters that we were going to go straight through the middle of Hurricane Alex. We had about 24 hours to prepare. So we made all the preparations, tied everything down, got everything sorted, and we took the news really badly. We had this victim mindset of, why is all this stuff happening to us? We just want to get there. We just want an easy ride. And after whinging and moaning about it for about half a day, we then had a pretty stern conversation with ourselves. And if you went onto your phone now and went onto Google Earth and dropped a pin in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that is literally where we were when this hurricane hit us. And up until this point, we were really struggling. We were still complete novices on the boat. Our bodies hadn't adapted to the 2 hours on, 2 hours off. We weren't sleeping well. We were still really scared at night. We weren't eating enough. And essentially, we just weren't comfortable on board. So yes, we had this enormous obstacle in the form of a hurricane, but we managed to reframe that obstacle into an opportunity. We now had 3 days of R&R, as much as you can in a hurricane, essentially, but 3 days to recuperate, to stretch, to try and sleep, to eat as much as we could. We downloaded every Matthew McConaughey film ever made onto an iPad, and we watched them each about 5 times. And at some point in those 3 days during that hurricane, something genuinely changed. It was like someone had flicked a switch, and we came out of that storm 2 different people on that boat. We went from dreading the nighttime to loving it, loving the stars, the comets, the meteors, the jellyfish. We went from struggling through 2-hour shifts to rowing 10 hours together all day and then going into the night shifts. And we put this massive change down to something that we are real believers in, that if you as an individual or as a team push yourself far enough outside your comfort zone for an extended period of time, that is where progress, innovation, and growth lives. And we had done that to such a dramatic extent that our learning curve was essentially vertical. And the second 1,500 miles of that row were the polar opposite to the first, and some of the best days of our entire lives.
So after rowing into the horizon for 53 days and not seeing a whole lot, on the morning of the 54th, we actually smelt Barbados before we saw it, which is incredibly strange. And it was only when we eventually saw the glow of the island that we thought, we might actually do this. This might actually happen. And it was a bit of a culmination of feelings for not just the 2 months at sea, but the 18 months beforehand, all the battles that we faced with fundraising, the hundreds of people that told us we were completely outrageous and stupid to think that we could even attempt this. It was only when we saw the island that we thought, this might actually happen. So we had a final 6 hours of rowing down the west side of Barbados in what ended up being the toughest rowing of the entire trip, as we were guided in through the reefs by a fishing vessel. And we knew that our friends and family were waiting for us in the harbour. And it was an incredibly surreal few hours.
So we then rounded the harbour wall of Port St. Charles in Barbados. Our friends and family were there. And if you can imagine, every single night shift where you've got headphones on, you're rowing on your own, the middle of the night, the only thing we were thinking about was this moment, like the arrival. And every day we were at sea, which was 54 days, this moment in our head got a bit grander. And in our head, maybe we became a bit cooler, to the point when we arrived into Barbados, we'd built this almost fake ego, and we were like, oh my God, I actually think we might be legends. And we rounded this harbour wall, and our friends and family had got everyone from this really fancy yacht club away from their lunch to clap us in. Our egos inflated a bit more. This massive wall behind us is a huge super yacht. The captain heard about us. They gave us a salute. They sounded the horn. Our egos grew a little bit more. And in our haste and our arrogance, we came around the front of this boat and we could see the jetty 6 meters away. And we cut the corner a little bit fine. And this boat had this massive angular anchor chain. And we had rowed for 54 days, 3,000 miles, and we got stuck 6 meters from the finish line. 6 meters. I'm soaking wet here because I had to jump in, try and detangle it from our rudder. This took 20 minutes. Everyone had just pissed off back to their lunch. It was just our drunk mums there, like, well done. It was the most embarrassing possible arrival I can explain, but actually sums it up pretty perfectly. And we stepped onto land. The relief was unbelievable. Our legs genuinely didn't work. We had to be carried to the bar, which I'm sure many people will be tonight as well. And it was just the relief I can't even put into words. And we'd gone and done something that so many people told us we couldn't do. And this is our arrival into Barbados.
We've been told beforehand that the last sort of slog around the edge of the island was one of the hardest parts of the row. And I think it took us about 5 hours of back-breaking rowing together to get to that final finish line, which is the concrete works in Barbados.
I can't really comprehend just yet of how amazing the support has been. Huge thank you, because it makes a massive difference when the weather's against you or you're completely fatigued and exhausted, to open up the laptop and see that you've got emails and you've got support from friends and family.
Turned the corner into the harbour, then pulled up onto the jetty and family, friends there, about 30 people with champagne, just going mental, and it was, yeah, probably one of the best moments of my life, without a shadow of a doubt. It was absolutely incredible, couldn't have gone better.
Yeah, with so much support from friends and family, like cheering us on when we got there. We jumped onto land in Port St Charles and could barely stand upright. Having sort of no idea and doing what we could to arriving yesterday, having experienced so much, and actually seeing the support there, people waving flags and loads of people cheering. Yeah, I'm not going to forget that day forever, I don't think, and it's one that I'll look forward to telling people about.
We have just arrived in Barbados after leaving the Canary Islands, having rowed 3,000 miles unaided across the Atlantic.
So that was the Atlantic. We arrived into Barbados. We were very lucky to be sponsored by a 5-star hotel who put us up. We completed the bar menu 15 times in the first day. We actually took a first aid kit across the Atlantic with us, with things for burns and sprains and everything. We didn't touch it once until we got to Barbados, where we needed Gaviscon because of all the daiquiris that we had at the bar. And then we came back to our lives. Went back to London, went back to our jobs, and things continued. But we were getting asked the same questions by our friends, family, colleagues. And everyone was like, what did you learn at sea? Like, did you find yourself on the waves of the Atlantic? And we were like, I don't think so. And then we met up about a week later to kind of debrief and decompress and have a chat about everything. And from those images, it's obvious. The physical changes are super obvious. The beards, the tan, the weight loss, those were really clear. But genuinely, when we touched land in Barbados, something had honestly changed within us. As James mentioned earlier, when we would tell people about this, ask for advice from people, friends, family, that we're going to go and row the Atlantic. We'd never rowed, we'd never sailed. People genuinely laughed at us. Like, there's no way you can do that. Like, it's arrogant, it's stupid, it's dangerous. And when we arrived in the Caribbean, we'd essentially actually realized what we were genuinely capable of. And we boil this down to the simplest form, that when we touch land, we'd essentially remove the word can't from our vocabulary. Now, we honestly believe that this is the most toxic word in the English language. Every single person in this room, whether it's with your team at work, whether it's your kids at home, whatever it is, would have said that word. Or we can't do that, it's never been done that way. I can't do that, I'm not fit enough, I haven't got the time. We can't do that, it will never get signed off. And as soon as that word is dropped in a meeting or anywhere else, it completely kills any innovation, any risk, any growth immediately. And James and I can't stand here and tell you about marketing frameworks. We can't tell you how to sell your business or your value proposition. That's not our experience. But what we can tell you is when you objectively try and remove this word from your vocabulary, your team's vocabulary, your family, whoever it is, the impact it can have is honestly unbelievable. And every single person puts this ceiling on themselves, which is complete bullshit. And we didn't know it. It took us to rowing an ocean to figure it out. But this is what the Tempest Two has been about for the last 10 years, built on the foundation of helping people and companies remove the word can't.
So what will it look like for us to remove the word can't? How do we embody that? You know, it's an incredibly simple thing to say, and the beauty really is in that simplicity. So for us, we would become professional adventurers naturally, you know, as you do. And we would apply the same mindset that took us across the Atlantic to anything else that we thought we might want to do. So we'd ride motorbikes from London down through the Sahara Desert the day after passing our test. We would break records as we crossed Patagonia in a world-first ultra triathlon with a 1600k cycle into a 75-kilometer ultra run and then a 100-kilometer stand-up paddleboard. And every time we were pushing ourselves, not just on the adventures and the expeditions themselves, but throughout the training, we were learning more and more about ourselves. And I think nothing really personifies and shows the manifestation of the growth of us and our approach to this ethos anything more than our most recent adventure, which was in Yosemite Valley in California.
So this was the background on the MacBook that we took across the Atlantic. And during those 3 days in the hurricane, James and I literally said to each other, when we get back to London, we're going to leave our jobs and we are going to take the Tempest 2 full time. We are going to become professional adventurers. And our wives were absolutely thrilled with the news. And we sat in this cabin in this hurricane with a pen and paper, and we wrote the worst business plan that's ever been written in history. We were drawing logos. It was pretty pathetic, actually. But we were like, what is going to be the next big adventure? What are we going to take on that's going to trump the Atlantic? And all the classics were there, the mountains, the deserts, etc. And as a complete joke, James pointed at the background. He was like, imagine climbing El Capitan. I'd never heard of it. Neither of us had ever climbed in our lives, never put a harness on, and we laughed it off. It was a complete joke, and we moved on with our lives. Until a few years later, we somewhat stupidly found ourselves in Yosemite Valley in California with a pretty ambitious goal. We wanted to climb El Capitan, the most famous rock face on the planet, 3,000 feet of vertical granite made incredibly famous recently by Alex Honnold, who climbed it without ropes. Hands up if you've seen Free Solo. One of the best sporting documentaries of all time. In our opinion, what Alex did on El Capitan, climbing it with no ropes, is the greatest human achievement in sport ever, point blank. But we wanted to put this mindset to the test like never before. We wanted to go from having never climbed to climbing El Capitan 18 months later. And when we go and give these talks, 100% of the time, it'd usually be a couple of blokes who come up to us after, and they'd be like, yeah, but you probably climbed, you know, bouldering gyms and stuff when you were kids, you know, trying to dumb it down. And just to prevent that happening again today, we've included some of the footage from our training just to show you how shite we truly were.
Just practicing our climbing systems in the kitchen of our apartment.
We've watched YouTube, so I think we're okay.
Quite nervous, actually.
You'll be alright.
Yeah, I think so.
Bomber!
This is mental.
It's aerial yoga.
You were going to take that out, that last one. I'm a professional adventurer. That can't be in there.
Full stitch up.
That is ridiculous. But unfortunately, that is the reality of learning to big wall climb. And actually learning to climb in general is incredibly challenging. And big wall climbing adds a complete new layer of difficulty and nuance that we just weren't ready for by any stretch. So we would spend the entirety of our time in the lead up to this training inside bouldering gyms in London, going to the Peak District and the Lake District whenever we could. And the feedback we got from everyone at those places, the best climbers in those places, they all told us that we had no chance, which was quite reassuring. It showed us we were on the right path, at least. But throughout our experience of doing multiple of these adventures and trips by now, we knew that the importance of the environment that you're in for learning is crucial to the pace at which you learn. So we made the bold decision to try and live in Yosemite Valley, ultimately, for as long as possible. So we flew out there 5 weeks ahead of the date, and the learning that took place in the 5 weeks leading up to the climb far surpassed the previous 18 months at home, and it wasn't even close. Things like the language, the impact that even the language had on us, where the people in the UK, our friends in the pub would ask us, which way are you going to die on this one? And in the US, in the Valley, it was, what are you going to do when this happens? Or what move are you going to make here? The whole thing was just far more positive, and it had a lasting impact on us. But that's not to say that life in the Valley was easy. It is easily the most anxiety-induced month we have ever had. We were waking up every morning with the literal and metaphorical mountain looming over our heads, and we were petrified. And the routine that we followed was we would drive into the cafe at the bottom of the valley every morning, we'd get a coffee, we'd open YouTube, and we'd watch some incredibly niche, specific video that is highly relevant for what we're about to do. We'd close the laptop after a couple of hours and some discussion, and then we'd go and apply it immediately without really knowing that that kind of is the secret to learning. It's knowledge acquisition and then application very quickly, feeding back to each other. And with the climbers in the valley meant that we were learning a huge amount very quickly. And somehow, after 5 weeks in the valley, we felt it's now or never. We've got to pull the trigger. Let's do this.
So yeah, after having a literal calendar in the back of the van we were living in Yosemite, ticking off every single day, the project day finally rolled around. And our goal was to get to the top, but the way we were going to do that was simple. We were going to spend 3 days vertical, 2 nights on the wall, and we were going to camp on some natural ledges on the route that we'd planned out before. These ledges were just little cliff edges, size of a single double bed, and that was our plan. And we wanted to leave day one at like 4 in the morning. We wanted to get up to our first camp, which was about 1,200 feet off the deck. We wanted to get there at lunchtime so we could have a bit of a breath, try and get used to being that high, being in that environment, and getting ready for day 2, which was the biggest day of the 3 by an absolute mile. And we started walking towards the wall, we geared up, we prepared ourselves mentally, and we started to climb. And something was wrong. We were so nervous. We were second-guessing every single move, every single knot. The 70-kilo bag that we're hauling behind us is getting stuck under every flake and every crack. And we were simply just climbing within ourselves. The nerves just had got the better of us. And this arrival time onto this ledge went from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m., to 4, to 8, to 10, to midnight, until we eventually crawled onto this ledge at 2 a.m. the following day. And, the plan was out the window. We were absolutely battered. Our arms and hands were covered in blood. We could barely speak. We were so tired. And as we got up onto this ledge, there were 2 climbers there in sleeping bags, fast asleep. And we kind of crawled up, and we were like, oh, hi, I'm Tom, this is James. They were like, yeah, I don't care, we're asleep. And they said, you've actually woke us up 2 hours ago. All we could hear was 2 British accents swearing, ruining the entire serenity of Yosemite Valley for everyone within a 10-kilometer radius. And so we were like, yeah, cool, sorry. Fell asleep, we collapsed, woke up the next morning, and to our surprise, we were sharing this tiny, tiny ledge, the size of half this stage, with Alex Honnold, the guy that climbed it without any ropes in free solo, and Tommy Caldwell, the star of a film called The Dawn Wall, who did the hardest ever climb up El Cap. So you had this incredible contrast. Why are you laughing? On one side of this ledge, you had the 2 greatest climbers that the sport has ever seen, hands down. Meters away, you had the 2 crappiest climbers to ever even look at El Capitan, let alone trying to climb it. And what was so fascinating, and a privilege to be in this environment up there with these two guys was that it was the total opposite to the conversations that James mentioned when we were speaking to great climbers in the gyms in London and the Peak District. We were always told we couldn't do it. And when we spoke to the two greatest climbers the world has ever seen, they had this incredible confidence that we'd be fine. And we literally said to them, this is how scared we were. We were like, do you think we're going to make it to the top? They'd never met us. They didn't know who we were. And they're like, yeah, of course you will. Just do these 3 things well. Look after the other guy. It might take a while, but you'll get there. And it just shows the importance. It's one of the biggest learnings we've had in our adventures, is the people that you surround yourself with, and more importantly, the people you seek advice from, is one of the biggest decisions you'll make. And the two greatest climbers said we could do it, and that gave us this huge amount of confidence. And they started climbing off. You know, Alex actually climbed, obviously, without any ropes in free solo. We have a world record that we're very proud of. We managed to take the most ropes ever up El Capitan, which is something that even to this day hasn't been broken and probably never will. But day 2, they climbed off and were doing the hardest route ever or something boring like that. And day 2 started with a game of rock, paper, scissors. It's a tradition in our adventures. If there is something that's about to happen that one of us could die doing, rock, paper, scissors comes out. James has a 100% success rate at this point. But luckily, for the first time in history, I win. And it means James has to go and do this.
So palms are sweating here, sorry. You can hear the desperation in my voice there, can't you, as I'm sprinting across the rock. That's a really famous feature on the nose of El Cap, and it's called the king swing. So the only way you can carry on making vertical progress is by doing that. And the way you climb El Cap is through a series of weaknesses or cracks in the rock. And when you get to the top of one, in this case, the king swing, Tommy fixes the line at the top of it, off the bolts, and I have to laterally sprint across the rock until I get to the next crack system, climb up, and then bring Tom back over. And what you can't see in there is the 19 minutes before that clip where I'm failing to get to that crack. And all I'm thinking about, firstly, I'm shattered, but all I'm thinking about is the sharp edge that the rope is running over before it gets to me, and how long it's going to take for it to completely shear before I end up in the trees below. So it's a really positive mindset going on as I'm doing that. Eventually, I get over there, and actually, we kind of joke about it, but the king swing was the complete unlock for the rest of the climb. You know, Tom mentioned earlier that we were climbing really slowly on day 1 because we were petrified. And when you get scared, you guys will feel it in business, in life. The natural thing that we want to do is pull everything closer and try and control everything even more. Micromanaging 101. And you have to do the opposite in order to keep going forward. So this is the perfect case of relinquishing all control and trusting my teammate 100%, which was really hard to do, knowing Tom's knot tying abilities. But when I was able to get over that, it kind of set us free a little bit on day 2. And we had 1,200 feet of vertical gain. It was a huge, huge day. There wasn't a huge amount of communication going on. We were going through the motions. But interestingly, the higher we got, the more at home we felt on the rock. And the exposure beneath our feet was just growing and growing. This is the highest we've ever been at this point. So it was a very, very bizarre situation, to say the least. And before we knew it, it was just our voices left, screaming profanities at each other again on the side of the rock as everyone else went to sleep. And that vast exposure beneath our legs was just replaced with complete darkness and just this dinner plate-sized beam of light that represented wherever we were looking. Time had completely gotten away from us. We'd barely drank, we'd barely eaten, and it took Tommy asking pretty frankly to snap us out of it. What time is it? You know, we've got to do something here. We're still 300 feet away from Camp 6. We need to sort ourselves out. And luckily, we made a decision. We had the wherewithal to make the right decision and find an emergency bivvy, and we ended up here.
What's on the menu, mate?
Oh my god.
What is it? Dinner or breakfast or?
I don't really know what's going on.
This is what we're sleeping on, and that is
Oh my cliff edge.
2,500 feet.
If the sun comes up, I'm gonna shit my pants. It's just complete ignorance at the moment. Can't see it.
Good morning from our emergency bivvy on Camp 5, and it is really the edge of a cliff.
Alex Honnold does not look like that in his documentary. So yeah, you are not meant to sleep here. I think we're probably the first people to ever sleep on this ledge. To be perfectly honest, we got incredibly lucky that we found this ledge when we did, because we were in a bit of trouble and our plan had been thrown out the window. But day 3 was meant to be the easy one. It was meant to be 500 feet to the summit. We were going to get there with the sun setting. We had a cameraman up there. But honestly, we were so exhausted, it's hard to put into words. We were on the wall for 72 hours. We had climbed for 64 of them. And we had just battled our way up. There was no finesse. The plan had gone out the window several times. And the last day, was meant to take about 4 or 5 hours. It took us 12. But there was this amazing moment on the final pitch of El Cap, the final 100 feet. And James had climbed up ahead of me. I was dangling on the end of the rope. And every single night leading up to the climb, we'd park the van literally in the meadow below the rock. We'd have food there, we'd have a drink there, and we'd watch the sun go down. And every single night, we'd watch all these headlamps appear. And we'd sit there and we'd be like, I wonder what it must feel like to be that headlamp, or I wonder what it must feel like to be that one at the very top. And even a week before we started the climb, we were questioning, do we push this off a year? Like, are we actually ready for this? We had that doubt. And there was this amazing moment. James climbed ahead. The sun had gone down. I was dangling on a piece of rope 3,000 feet off the deck, friends and family in the valley, and we were now that head torch. And as we summited El Cap, the relief, the pride that we have, absolutely takes the crown on any adventure we've done because of what we had to go through to do it. And what's so fascinating, even standing here speaking to you guys, when I watch these videos and photos back, my hands are absolutely soaking wet. I cannot even imagine being on that ledge with my legs dangling over. I can't imagine watching James do the king swing. And this is something that we see time and time and time again. Every adventure we do, that when we're training for it, when we're doing the adventures themselves, we're the most focused, we're the most mentally and physically strong we've ever been. And then when we come back to the UK and we come and speak on amazing stages, at amazing events like this, and life becomes a little bit soft again, honestly, that mindset leaves us. And we never knew why. Until 18 months ago, a piece of research in the world of neuroscience came out that absolutely floored us. And it was about a part of our brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. Now, this is a small part of our brain in our frontal lobe, and it is responsible for how everyone in this room reacts to physical, mental stress. It is responsible for our tenacity, our willpower, our motivation, our resilience. And the big thing that came out in this research is that people with a small AMCC, they struggle with getting themselves out of bed, sticking to a diet, going to the gym, working hard. And those with a large AMCC have that elite mindset. They're driven, they get things done. But what they found was, like any muscle in our body, it's malleable and it can be trained. So even if you're born with a small AMCC, we can manipulate it and affect it and become more motivated, increase our willpower, our tenacity, and become stronger people. And the big breakthrough was how we grow it. And it is incredibly simple. The first step is you have to do something hard, something that is slightly challenging to you, slightly outside your comfort zone. But the biggest thing, the biggest breakthrough, Andrew Huberman said this is the biggest breakthrough in neuroscience in 100 years, is that you don't want to do it. And that is the thing that was the kicker. It doesn't lean towards how hard something is, it leans towards how much you don't want to do it. So if you love running and you're running a 100-kilometer ultramarathon and you're buzzing, your AMCC is asleep. If you hate running and you go for a 2-kilometer run in the rain tomorrow morning, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. And it isn't just physical things, it's not just adventures, it's small daily tasks. If you don't want to do it, and you do it anyway, this part of our brain grows. And when you start looking at your daily lives with that kind of lens, the small decisions in your business, that awkward conversation with a client, the employee who really isn't cutting it, but you don't want to let them go, you don't want the confrontation, those small decisions, when you compound that across yourself as a leader, your entire team, your family, over a month, over a year, over 10 years, that is what builds true resilience. That is what builds motivated, incredible cultures. And we see it time and time again. So if there's one thing that we want you guys to take away, it's the power of doing hard things. And I'll let James wrap up here because we just want to double down on this message before we let you guys go, because we genuinely think it can genuinely change people's lives.
Yeah, so for us, the next version, it's always about choosing the hard thing. What is that version for us? What is the next hard thing that we are planning on doing to embody what we talk about and that we truly believe? And that is that, next year we will be the first people ever to swim across the North Sea. From Scotland to Norway, from Lerwick to Bergen, in what is one of the most unpredictable oceans in the world, some of the coldest waters in the world, and shock horror, we're completely new to swimming. We don't know what we're doing. But I think it's really not about what we're doing and what we're facing. We really just want to hold a bit of a mirror up, because the beauty of these big things, they all sound epic. Rowing oceans, swimming across the sea, climbing mountains, sound grand, but the beauty of them is they all are only possible by tiny little things done over and over again. And that tiny thing is usually that hard choice, that hard thing that gets doubled down on consistently over time and time again. You end up with a pretty epic result. And everyone's version of the Atlantic or the North Sea is completely different. Everyone's version in this room will be completely different. So I just ask you to challenge you to see what's possible when you remove the word can't. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.